On this episode of Scots Abroad, we speak to an MLS Cup winning central midfielder with a knack of scoring rockets from outside the box. From growing up in the Rangers Academy, then being let go, and finding himself ready to chuck football whilst in the bottom tier with Elgin City. A move to USA in USL2 in the summer of 2007 changed his career. Upon that summer, he was picked up by MLS franchise Columbus Crew and success followed. Spells at Portland, Houston, Seattle, Dallas, playing in the CONCACAF Champions League before moving to the infamous New York Cosmos and playing alongside childhood idol Raul. This is Scots Abroad with me, John Walker, and this episode's guest, Adam Moffat. Adam, how are you keeping?
I'm doing well, dealing with everything that's going on right now. With 3 little kids in the house, it's a bit hard.
I guess it is worst place to be stuck though, right then, in Sacramento?
Yeah, it's a good place. Been here about 3 years. Actually now it's about 100 degrees. What's that Celsius? That's 30 odds. It's 9 in the morning. It's about 85 right now. So it's starting to get hot. That's the thing about here. In the summer, it gets really, really hot. But deal with it. I can't complain.
Yeah, you're running soccer schools just now. Are you getting any idea when you can go back to work and when you can go back to coaching?
Probably in the next few weeks, the way things are. It's just there's a lot of no contact over here. In California, they've probably been, the way it works in America, it's state by state. So obviously the president can say one thing, but the governor of each state's they're gonna have their own phases to go through. And California's a little bit more thorough with it, so a little bit behind some other states where it's some other states like, yeah, just do whatever you want, but they're being a little bit more cautious here. So I don't know. I'm in no rush. It's young kids I train. It's like if professionals can't do it right now, I'm not too worried about young kids doing it, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. This is an interview I've been really looking forward to, Adam. I obviously know you from way back, but I just want to talk through your career, give everyone an idea of the type of career you've had outside of Scotland. Born in Glasgow, moved down to Wales, spent some time there before moving back up to Scotland. What are your earliest memories of playing football, watching football?
Earliest memories? I played a little bit in Wales. They're big into the rugby and stuff. They start getting, and I did a lot of cross country. So I think I was 7 when I moved back. He moved to Linwood, but I remember cross country there. I don't really remember playing football much. I need to apologize as well in case I say soccer a few times. I need to get that in right now. So I don't remember playing football too much. I remember a little bit, but then when I came back up here, I was a good athlete. You may remember I could run fast. I changed as I got older, to be honest. But when I was a good athlete. So when I came back to Linwood, tried playing with I think St. Convos at the time locally. And again, my athleticism was good. I could touch it past somebody and run. I had no real control around like that. But that was really the first. I was actually Paul Payton's dad, Ian McJimsky. Ian was the coach at the time, so I remember Ian saying, "You got to get playing." So that was me and Paul Payton were best buddies at a young age. But it was, that's probably my first memory, 7, 8, playing for St. Convos.
Were you always a central midfielder, Adam, or did you play wide then with that pace?
Yes, I was wide. I was. They first put me left wing, even though I was right-footed. They put me on the left wing, so I used that speed. Again, I could touch it past somebody, but I'd probably just run right off the end of the line. I never knew much. I never knew the rules or nothing. And then most of my youth career I ended up playing right back. Learning a bit more about the game and the discipline with that. I get right back because I could get forward doing cross country when I was younger. I could get forward, I could get back, I could do a little bit of all that. So right back was probably the position I was more comfortable at up until my late teens, I'd say.
Where was that you started to get moved into midfield? Was that in the youth career at Rangers or was it further ahead?
No, that was actually at Rangers. So I did a bit when I was at Rangers, probably under 16s at that point, I think it was. So under 16s, that was Bobby Russell was the coach there. So went in playing right back, and he knew I could play in the midfield. So I had moved to right mid a little bit, and then he put me in the middle of the field a little bit more. And then when I went to Ross County maybe a year later or so. Well, that was me signing my apprenticeship there. Gardner Spears put me in centre mid. That's when I started to get slower. I think it was about 17, and I don't know, I took a stretch or whatever, but I just I could not run past them anymore. So yeah, but that's, I always tell people, kids, whatever, you have to adapt. You have to learn as much as you can, because you might be fast when you're 7 or 8, but then all of a sudden you get to 17, you take a stretch, everybody else catches up. If you don't have all those other skills built up, you're just going to be left behind. So I was fortunate enough to get some good training when I was younger, being in with Rangers, so that was it. That was when I changed positions, and that kind of stuck for a long time.
When you're at Rangers under 16s, what is the seriousness of the level, and what kind of coaching is it you're getting? How many nights a week are you in, and are you given any specific programs? If you're a right back, are you watching the right back in the under 19s, under 21s, or is it very much you just focus on the 16s?
At that point, I mean, it was funny with the youth system, it was a lot of the Dutch coming through. Dick Advocat was there first, and then it changed a lot. Who else was there? I mean, John Gregg was around. He was overseeing things. He didn't do too much of the coaching, but I'm trying to remember who else was there coaching. But Bobby Russell was our coach, but we never did too much, at 16. We trained a lot, we're maybe 3 nights a week, 3-4 nights. We're going up to Murray Park, which has changed names, right? It's something else. Hummel Training Centre, I don't know, whatever it is. Yeah, but there wasn't too much. We tried to play the system or whatever the first team was playing, but we never watched the players. But Alan Hutton was the right back who was older than me, who obviously ended up having a good career. And I played a few games on the under 19s, and you get to play with some of those guys. And that was, as a younger one, I was one of the younger ones. I remember, man, there was a big step up, So and then I never get taken on full time with them. I was right in the brink, I wasn't sure which way it was going to go, and then obviously it didn't work out, but things did work out in the long run,
Yeah. What are the discussions like at that point when you've committed 3-4 years to a club and then they have to tell you that it's time up?
Oh, it's tough. I remember we were all sitting in there, and I mean, how many on that team? 15 players in the team, maybe more, and some of them are Ross McCormick, Robert Davidson. I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, it was mostly, there wasn't that many from our age. Those two had kind of already known. They were already playing with the 19s. They were in training already. But I remember we were all sitting inside and just getting called in. People coming back, they're crying. Obviously, because you've committed you think it's the end of the world at that point. To be honest. And I remember there was some players you're thinking, they might get called out. I remember me going out, coming back in. Guys are like, "Yeah, you good?" And I'm like, "No, that's it." At that point, you just straight away. I remember feeling the disappointment. That's it. I'm done. Because that's it. Full time opportunity, but realizing obviously there is more after that. But the thing is, in Scotland, there's not much. Once you go down, you go part time, and then it's tough. It's tough to get back up. I was fortunate enough to go down, drop down a level, and then kind of stay in the game, because it doesn't happen. A lot of those players, maybe last a year or two, they'll go sign for a smaller team, don't break into the first team, and then that's it. It happens a lot.
You said you ended up at Ross County. Where did the decision come from to go so far north and out of your comfort zone, I suppose?
Yeah, that was so I was training with Stenhouse Muir. It was Stenny. I was getting a train there every day, and I tried with Partick Thistle. To be honest, I was thinking somebody who was close to probably getting on with Rangers, I should be able to go with another team. But it's just they have their guys in the system they've put in years of work through. So it's harder than you think, because you're like, man, I've been with a good team. Somebody should pick me up, but that wasn't the case. So Partick Thistle, I was thinking maybe with them as well, and it never worked out. So I was at Stenhouse Muir. I was driving there every day. It was between them, and then all of a sudden, a friend of mine, Brian Young, who's from Johnston, who's local, he signed with Ross County, and I think they needed a couple more players. So I went up for a couple of days, took that long ride, the megabus up to Dingwall. And there was a bunch of boys who were, Glasgow, Edinburgh area. And then really enjoyed it. It was a great place to go, to be honest. I did not know much about up there, if anything, to be honest. But it was just an opportunity for me to at least further my career somewhat. And it was good. I loved the 3.5 years maybe I spent up there.
Yeah, you made your professional debut 7th of May 2005. Actually, probably about 2 minutes away from where I'm conducting this interview just now, Broadwood Stadium. You remember much of your debut?
No, I don't really. I don't, to be honest. But I think I came in at right back, I want to say. I remember I was on the brink. I was always on the brink. Alex Smith was a manager at the time. So him, Jimmy Bone screaming at you. I don't really remember too much. I remember, I think the second game I played, which was a home game. I played the whole second half, I think, for that, or maybe a little bit longer. But I remember that more so than the first game. I think the first one was just like, get the ball, just boot it, So I don't remember too much. I really don't. I remember thinking I was young and small compared to these men, which they are. I remember that being intimidating. I definitely do remember that.
Yeah. What do you think of the level then? You've said you even went from 16s to 19s to Rangers to watching them train and them play, and it was a totally different level to what you're used to. Have you dropped down a level, but there's a totally different depth that you don't have?
Yeah, I mean, there's still... Yeah, obviously we're going to Ross County. I mean, Ross County was a good team when I was there, especially the first team, and the youth system was good as well. There's a lot of good players came through there, but you have to adapt everywhere you go. There is a little bit more of a style, obviously being in Rangers, the Dutch influence there at that time when I was there, there's a little bit more emphasis maybe and a little bit more style, whereas you go somewhere else and it's just like, can you run? Can you put the boot in? And it doesn't have to be that effective more than anything, right? And it's a battle. And that's one thing, I'm going to head a little bit, but that's one thing over here, there's so many different influences. You go play a game here, pick up game, whatever. I mean, you have people from everywhere around the world and all the coaches at youth teams and everything from all over. So there's so many different influences. So the styles, it's kind of a mishmash, but it's good. Again, that's getting ahead a little bit. That's something I really enjoyed.
So on that, John Robertson comes in as a new manager. Was it just he had his own ideas and you just weren't going to fit in?
Yeah, so I remember 2006 maybe two. I think it might have been 2006 he came in. So Alex Smith had just signed me to deal with the first team, and I was... At that point, I was playing for Scotland under 19s. Gardner Spears was the head of the youth at Ross County, and he was probably something that I'd credit for giving me a real boost in my career. He made me the captain of the team, and just gave me a lot of confidence. And I remember those years. I remember playing for Scotland under 19s and thinking I'm one of the best players right here, right? And I genuinely believed that, and I was so confident. I was at Ross County, which was, everybody else's Celtic in England at that point, guys from Leeds, guys from Man U, whatever, but I'm at Ross County, and I knew at that point, I was like, I had so much confidence, and I do credit that to him. But then it's funny because Alex Smith signs me at the first team, and we'd been told, the budget and all that, it's going to be a smaller amount of players in the team next year, so you're going to get a lot of time. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. So I went to Australia. My big sister lives over in Australia, so she moved over there a long time ago, 15 years ago, whatever. So I was visiting her, and I don't know how I found it. Maybe it was the internet around then. Maybe it was on the internet or something. But I found out that Alex Smith had been fired, John Robertson had been brought in. So I was like, don't know how that changes things. I still felt like I could do something. But then all of a sudden, I go back in there, and he wanted to bring his own players in, some of his own players. So he looked at maybe the 4 or 5 young boys that were signed, if I can maybe get rid of them, that'll make some money. And he wanted to sign this Polish guy. And I remember at first, so a lot of the boys, he's like, okay, we want to get rid of you. A lot of those boys took the money, whatever, they're gone. But I told them, I was like, nah, I'm going to stay here. And I stayed, and he ended up signing this Polish guy. He came in, I stayed, I played, I trained and stuff. And then he left. I don't know if he get fired or if he took another job. I don't know whatever happened. He'd have fallen out. But he ended up leaving, so I ended up staying there another year. George Adams came in as the new technical director, whatever he was at that point. He came in, but then I ended up staying another year. I signed another year on that. I got hurt, needed surgery. But that was tough. I remember being, 19 at that point. I needed surgery on my knee, and my meniscus and my cartilage was torn, whatever. And the club had no money. They didn't want to pay for it. I'm like, I get hurt playing for you, and I wasn't playing, right? I wasn't starting the first team. If it was Don Cowie or John Rankin, those boys would have been, oh, for sure, we'll get it done. But they didn't want to get it done for me. So what ended up happening was the players all put money in, and they raised, I don't know how much, a few hundred, half of whatever the surgery would have cost. They ended up raising that, and then the club paid the other half. So again, if they didn't do that at that point, I'd have been done. Probably I wouldn't have. I doubt I'd have kept playing at that point. I didn't have money to pay $1,000 or whatever it was for surgery. So I need to credit all those guys from Ross County who they didn't. I mean, they didn't know I could have kept playing or whatever, But that was a good thing that they done. And I know a lot of the boys. Jim Laughlin was the captain there, Lockie, and he was the guy that initiated that. So I probably need to reach out to him and thank him for that.
So how long was your surgery and rehab from that before you go to Elgin?
Long time. Try to remember it. It took a little bit to get back going, but then when I did get back going, it wasn't at that point. I wasn't going to be playing. So I think George Adams approached me, and he really liked me. I know he did. He was a fan of me. I'm trying to think who was the manager at that point. I don't think it was Derek. Derek was maybe playing. His son Derek Adams was playing. But he's like, look, here, we'll pay you out, and you'll figure something else out. So I ended up taking that at that point. And at that point, I was done. I was kind of demoralized. 2 years prior, a year and a half prior, I was feeling like I'm one of the best at my age in the country to all be like, I'm done. This is it. And it's so many players. I mean, I'm a decent player. I'm okay, right? But there's so many players who were more technically gifted than I were, and who just were unfortunate, or, some of them, maybe it was a work ethic, but definitely I got a lot of luck go my way. But it happens so much. So many quality players just don't make it. Like I said, there's so many times I could have been out of the game, so many times. And I think once I did get the second opportunity to come to America, I'm like, I'm not going to pass this up, because I realised how hard it is to get that.
Yeah, so you spent a season at Elgin, performed pretty well, but I think you said before you came a bit disillusioned with football. I mean, it's not where... It's okay, I guess, to go to Elgin if you're attached to Rangers and Celtic and you're going out on loan to get experience, but it's not where you want to spend your 19, 20-year-old part of your career. At the end of that season, the call comes in. There's an opportunity to go play in the USL2, I think it's called now, which is a summer league in America. Yeah,
USL2, it's maybe the USL Championship, maybe they called it. They keep changing it, everybody's changing the names of the leagues. 4-month season. It was short. It was Richie Huxford, who was the assistant for Elgin, English guy. He was the assistant. He's like, hey, I got a friend who started the team in Cleveland, Ohio, in the USL. I mean, I'd obviously heard of the MLS. I didn't know there was anything below that. So I was like, you know what? I was definitely at a point right there, and I've been looking at maybe going to college or going back to school. I mean, I did pretty well at school, even though I left a year earlier. I had good grades, and I'm smart enough. But so I was thinking, okay, what course can I do, or what direction am I going to go? But then that came in. I was like, well, I may as well give it a bash. I don't know. I wasn't going to go back to Elgin. Doing that drive every week was fun. It was fun, but that was a bit too much. So I was like, I'll give it a bash. Maybe it's just a summer. I'll have fun, and I'll kind of see where it goes from there. I'll be back in 4 months, and I can see what I'm going to do.
And yeah, the USL2 is kind of where a lot of people will look to college footballers normally to see who's going to come into the MLS in the future. I think it's like 75% of the college players that make it to MLS will have played in USL2 at some point. What did you find the standard of football like at that level, and the coaching that you were getting?
The coaching was really good. So Martin Rennie's a Scottish guy. So Martin was the coach who knew Richie, and he's a guy who he never played over in Scotland. He went over to America, but he's done really well. He's been in the MLS. He coached Vancouver Whitecaps. And I was immediately impressed by him. He's very thorough, but he's a good guy as well. He got players playing for him. He's now the head coach at Indy 11, who are in the USL Pro. I don't know. I should know the league because that's what Sacramento is in. I should know the name of the league. Maybe they're the USL Championship. Another one's USL League One. That's what it is, maybe. And there's a USL League Two. I don't know. I should study all that. But so yeah, he's currently the head coach at Indy 11. It was good. It was very. People don't understand, the Americans. Obviously, we think they don't know the game, but there was a lot of good players, and this wasn't even that high a level, but there was some players who played at some good college teams, and I was impressed. They're good athletes. And that's the thing you can say about them. They're really good athletes. I mean, they grow up. I remember being training, we would train and there's a basketball hoop and guys are dunking. You're just like, oh, I can't even touch that thing. They're just doing like they can shoot, they're draining 3-pointers all the time. They just grow up throwing a football, American football. It's like nothing to them. So they grow up very athletic. I definitely did think, though, I was a little smarter probably. I think maybe I played more growing up. I mean, it's like in Scotland, growing up, especially when we grew up, I don't know if it's the same. I've heard mixed, it was just constantly out playing with the ball all the time. Americans, like I say, they'll do other sports, so maybe they're not as, that IQ's maybe not right there. But once you get to the top level in MLS, those guys, really good. But I was definitely impressed. I didn't really know what I was getting into. And they had boys from all over the world, even there, boys from Africa, boys from the Caribbean. We had one guy from Guyana, which is the Caribbean, but it's technically in South America. And he was the top scorer for their national team and really good player, really, really good, but just from a small country that I'd never heard of at that point.
Yeah, and in that summer league, you finished second. You scored 8 goals in 19 games. How long after that? So you were in Team of the Year. How long after that are MLS teams starting to sniff around? And did you realise that was even a thing that could happen?
I didn't, but we played a friendly game against Columbus, and the head coach of Columbus at that point was Ziggy Schmidt. So Ziggy sadly passed away maybe 2 years ago, but he was the guy who took me into the MLS with Columbus, and then he was my the manager at Seattle when I was there as well. But he watched a couple games and he liked what he saw. But I didn't. I mean, I wasn't sure if anything was going to come of that. So he had me come down, train, me and another boy. It was an Australian boy, Caleb Patterson-Sewell. He was a goalkeeper who was in the Liverpool Academy, who was playing with this team in Cleveland. So we both went down, trained. We did pretty well. The way it works over there is, and it changes a little bit, but so they saw me play. So Columbus saw me, so they put discovery rights on. So this is very interesting. They put discovery rights on me. So that means if any other team saw me, they're like, oh, he scored 8 goals in this league. Say we're New York, we want to try and sign him. Columbus says, we saw him first, so you need to give us something. It's unbelievable. So you need to give us something. Even if Columbus doesn't want to sign me, they can say, well, we discovered him first. And there's been cases in the MLS where that's been like, I don't know, somebody who's played in the Premiership, right? And someone could have put discovery rights on that player and said, oh, we discovered him. So then when he tries to go in MLS, they're like, oh, yeah, we want to sign him. But we discovered him. It's like, very interesting. That was my first kind of grasp at that. Like saying, oh, so I have to go here. It's like, yeah, pretty much. So fortunately, it worked out with Columbus. There was international limits at the time, so they don't give out that many international contracts. So I was right. I think they had 1 spot left, and if they didn't at that point, I probably would have been coming back to Scotland. So they had 1 spot left, and Ziggy liked what he saw. He says I reminded him a lot of Simon Elliott. I don't know if you remember Simon, but Simon, he was in New Zealand. Yeah, might have been captain. Him and Ryan Nelson. He might not have been captain, but he played for Fulham. And then he ended up being my coach last year in Sacramento, or for my last season with Sacramento Republic. But so Siggy said I reminded him a lot of him, so he ended up signing me. And I'm glad he did at that point, because again, I don't know where I'd probably come back to Scotland. Yeah, who knows?
So you signed that summer, end of the MLS season 2007. You make your MLS debut away at DC United. It's a pretty meteoric rise from someone who was ready to chuck football. What happens between the end of that season and next season? Have you been signed on a couple-of-year contract?
At that point, it's the same contract. So again, the way contracts work in the MLS, so you sign, I think probably 4 years at that point. So what they used to do is they used to sign a 4-year contract, and it would be option each year, but you don't get the option as the player. There's no guarantees, there's no option. So, and I signed for not much of that. I mean, I think it was like 18,000. I think it was at that point, which was okay. I was getting my housing paid for, which is good. It goes a long way in Ohio, but some other boys in New York or LA, those guys couldn't, barely enough to live on, to be honest, just the cost of living. So I signed that. So what ends up happening is you do well, and you're like, can I get a new contract? But you're tied into that, and they're like, yeah, we have your option, and the option only goes up 5% each year. So you think adding 5% on, so you're adding not even 1,000 on each year. You know, it adds up. And people were getting stuck with that for 4 years. So they picked up my option that first year. And they liked what they saw when I came in at the end of that 2007 season. Like I say, it was like a second chance for me. So, you know, I was busting my balls. I was making sure I stood out. A lot of these guys who'd maybe come into college who were there, you know, it's just, they've been spoiled in college. You go to college, play football over here, you're spoiled, the facilities, all that, you know. And so when I got that second chance, I'm like, this does not last. So I made sure that I was putting the work in, and they recognized that going into the 2008 season, I was, you know, starting.
So on to that 2008 season, opening game versus Toronto. Take your ball on your chest, 25 yards out, lovely right foot half volley. You contributed quite a lot of goals in your time in MLS. Was that something that you always had?
I think I could score. So when did it happen with me? I was more box to box as I was younger, and at that point when I was in Columbus, and it changed probably the next year or two. I ended up doing my knee in, so the cruciate ligaments in my knee, and then I sat back a little bit more. I was more defensive midfielder. Again, I could run as much, but I wasn't going as forward. I wasn't scoring as many goals, getting into the box, coming in late, all that stuff. You know, Frank Lampard, I wasn't doing that, but I was just sitting back more. And obviously, I had a good strike on me, so I could take a decent shot from long range. But it's something, you know. It's, as I was younger, I definitely did score more goals, but as I get older, maybe less, but the quality was probably a little bit better.
Yeah, I guess the point is, if nobody's watched your goals and goes back and watches them, you don't need to run into the box to score goals if you can hit them for 40 yards, right?
That's it. I know. That's what everybody says. But it was funny because I mean, it's getting ahead a little bit, but every time I'd get the ball, I'd be maybe just in my half and I'd be, shoot. I'm like, you can't shoot every time. But yeah, I scored a few nice ones. I know. Let's make sure put those on there. People can see those. So
Columbus Crew went on to win the Eastern Conference and the MLS Cup. You missed out in the playoff run-in due to injury. But in a year that all the focus was on David Beckham moving to LA Galaxy, do you feel like it was maybe brushed over a wee bit that someone from Scotland who came from Elgin, played in centre mid and just won the MLS Cup?
Yeah, I was definitely obviously with that. But I mean, Beckham coming over, so it was the same year it was 2007, but he was really establishing himself. I think obviously if I played in the final, there would have been more to it there, you know. But I know I did. My season was ended short with my knee surgery. But people in Scotland definitely picked that up. There was some stories in the paper, or whatever. It wasn't big, but people always reaching out like, "Wait, this guy was playing for Elgin 2 years ago, you know, and now he's won the MLS Cup." And I was going to the White House to meet President Obama. You know, people, he's meeting the President of America like 2 years prior. He was driving Elgin, or he was driving Arbroath, playing a game there, freezing. It was a quick turnaround, a big transformation. But I think what people don't realize is the work that goes into it. I know a lot of people at that point saw, oh man, he's definitely lucky, fortunate, but it's hard work at the same time. Again, I realized I had an opportunity, a second chance to do it. So I made sure, you know, that every day I was putting the work in, because I could have been given a second opportunity and whatever, you know, let's just see how it happens. But there's the days and the days of just constantly working hard, grinding to get there. You know, it wasn't just like, oh, he went from Elgin just the same and then went over to America, MLS Cup, visiting the president. No, it wasn't that. There's definitely a story in between there, and the hard work that, you know, is required to have it. Who
would you attribute the changes to your game in, or the extra stuff you added? Was it Ziggy, or was it just the coaching? Was it the players around you?
There was definitely a challenge. Ziggy was good with, you know, he put a really, really good squad together. We had Guillermo Barros Chalotto. I don't know if you remember him, but I used to remember him from Champ Man back in the day. Him and his brother. He's a Champ Man guy. He played for Boca. I'm an absolute legend in Boca, but here he is living in Columbus, Ohio. Nobody knew who he was, you know, and he was unbelievable. I'd never played with MD at that level, nowhere close to that level my whole career. And then you could give this, you would always find a way to get the ball. You make a run, he would get it to you. You're like, it's two people right there. But I honestly, I'd never seen anything like it. But I remember, I used to do a lot of running when I was younger, but just giving him the ball, just work hard, get the ball to those guys like that. And he was disciplined. He'd get on you. But playing with a better standard of player where they kind of held you accountable. And you don't, when it's somebody like that as well, it's like you want to raise your game. It forces you. I was fortunate enough to play with a lot of good quality players, and I'd never be at their standard, but I can try. I can really, really try and make sure I put that work in for someone like that. So but that whole team that we had in Columbus, like I say, we went on to win MLS Cup with a great unity on the team. We were underdogs for sure, and nobody looked at that team and said they're. I mean, you still had Beckham on those other teams, Donovan and the Galaxy. There were some big names in the league there, not as maybe as big as they are now, but we just had a great togetherness and we get some good success from it.
So you touched upon it a bit there. Winners of sports cups in America, whether it be NBA championships, Super Bowls, MLS Cups, everyone's invited to the White House that wins it. At which point did you realise that was going to happen for Columbus Crew? And what was the day like in general?
I don't think I realised initially. It's obviously you win, you get a ring, you get all that stuff. It's a little bit different. You get those, but I think during that 2009 season, I think it was brought up. We're going to go to the White House at some point because it's not like you go the next week. I think we maybe won in November or December, and then we ended up going in the summer the following year. But then that sunk in. I was like, oh, wait, I'm going to meet, because Obama had just become president, I think, that year, I want to say. Yeah. So I think we're maybe one of the first teams to go visit. So then once I realized that, I'm like, well, this is pretty cool. Thinking, okay, a couple of years ago, I was playing in Scotland, not knowing where I'm going. Here I am in a suit, getting ready to go visit the president, who's probably at that point the most famous person in the world.
How hard did you try for it to be your number jersey that he was holding up at the photo opportunity?
I mean, it would have been good, right? Really good. No, I remember that when we did the tour, we did all that stuff. So we're walking through there, and it was as we we led out. He came, and he never chatted for much. He shook everyone's hand. But me and Robbie Rogers, I don't even know Robbie Rogers. So Robbie Rogers was, when he played for Leeds, he came out. He was one of the first gay soccer players. He played for the Galaxy. He came back, but he was a good friend of mine, and we were like, okay, we got to get in the best spot possible for this photo. So we were kind of watching like how they were lining us up, and we slid in. And so for the photo, if you see me and Robbie, we're right behind them. We're right there. So that was funny. Like if we're in this, and you saw some of the guys were at the back, you could hardly see them. We're like, no, we're gonna get right on here. But it was such a fun day. I mean, honestly, it's not something like I say, you get a trophy, you get a medal, you get a ring over here, but actually going somewhere like that's one of the most famous places in the world, and it's just a fun buzz as well, because what happens is after that 2008 season, a lot of the players left as well. So that's another thing. What happens, you can win the MLS Cup, and another good friend of mine, Brad Evans, who went on to Seattle, he won the MLS Cup. The next morning he gets a phone call saying, hey, you've been sent to Seattle. So, and that's just how it works. The season, as soon as the season's done, it's like they start making all these moves that you have no say about. So he ended up moving. Another few players moved on. So we all got together, and it was kind of a little bit of a reunion at that point. And
so what is the day like from the minute you arrive at the White House? So tour, then the photo op, and then what do you do after that? Are you just chucked out like it's an after party and they want people out?
No, we did. So we got in there. I think maybe the day of or the day prior, we did, like a White House. We went to school, in an area, maybe a rougher area in the DC area. So we went to a school there, and we did like a clinic, showing skills to the kids, publicity. So we did something like that. And then the day before, and then the day of, we go in, do the tour, go around everywhere, and then the president came out. He was probably there maybe 15, 20 minutes. Like I say, it was brief. I'm sure he was busy. But it was brief. He came out, spoke to everyone, shook hands, took a picture, and then we were off. I mean, we were still playing our season, so it was just a quick couple day trip. But it's definitely one that I'll never forget.
Yeah, he's won the conference again next year. Didn't win the MLS Cup, but you got your first experience of Champions League football in the CONCACAF region.
Yep.
What's the standard like? I know you never played in Champions League over in Europe, but What is the standard? What's the fan base like of that competition?
That's a fun one. I mean, not many people probably know about that, but the CONCACAF we maybe used to call it the donkey calf. Maybe that's what we call it. It really depends where you went, because you'd be in Guatemala on a Tuesday night. It wouldn't be sold out sometimes, or you'd be in Trinidad and Tobago on a Wednesday, and it's fun. It was fun experience to go and do that, but it wasn't, especially the group stages of it. There wasn't. It's not like the Champions League where that is the main attraction. It wasn't. They'd rather go watch the game on Saturday, a league game. It's the same with us with Columbus. We'd get more fans at an MLS game than we would on a Wednesday night. So it wasn't that big attraction, but it was fun. The amount of places I got to go, and I played a lot of games in the Champions League with Columbus and then the Dynamo a little later on in my career. Getting to see all these places, and as you got a little bit further in the competition, so it was typically all the Mexican teams would make it, and then you'd play them, and those would be a little bit different, whether it be like the knockout rounds, stuff like that. That was different. That was a different atmosphere, and it doesn't matter if you're home. It feels like an away game. There's a lot of Mexicans, or even Costa Rica, anyone, you play any of those countries from Central America, a lot of the fans, even again, it's a home game, you will probably be outnumbered. A lot of the times our local fans were outnumbered. So I was a weird experience playing a home game, but feeling like it was away.
What was the best country you visited, or the best stadium you played at then in the Champions League? Who did we play? We played a good game against, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Toluca. So Toluca is a team just outside Mexico City. They're a little bit smaller. We played Cruz Azul as well, who are from there. And they have a massive stadium. I'm trying to remember their stadium. Probably one of the famous ones in Mexico. But that was a cool experience. But the game against Toluca was a close one. I think we maybe won the first leg, or we drew it, whatever. So we went down, played the second leg, and it was maybe the quarterfinals. But that got feisty. I think it was 2 each, and then we ended up losing in extra time. But people are chucking stuff at you, and that's a good experience. And I forget what other country I was in. Maybe it was Honduras or something, where you're walking in. These old stadiums are beat up as well. You know what I mean? You're walking in the stadium, and I think I maybe threw a little elbow or something at the end of the game. But and people are just like banging at the big metal fences, basically, just trying to get at you. I'm like, oh, you gotta get me back to the hotel. But it's definitely a little bit intimidating. We get police escorts everywhere, so we'd be in the team bus, and we'd have the police motorbikes. They get the big assault rifles and everything. They're ready to go, driving in front. I don't think we're ever really in any risk, but a lot of these places, you just have to be a little bit careful where you go. The following season for Columbus, which ended up being your last, you didn't win the Eastern Conference, but obviously in the MLS, the way it works is the top 2 or 3 teams from each conference go into the playoffs for the MLS Cup, where the real trophy lies. What happens with the end of that season that you don't get a contract, or is it the trading system that comes into play?
Trading at that point, and it's changing, it's constantly evolving, right? It's because there's, in MLS, you have the CBA, right, which is the collective bargaining agreement, and then you have a players' union, so they agree on a contract. And you maybe heard of it in other sports as well, American sports, where they try and get in an agreement. It's usually a 4 or 5 year contract. So they'll have to renew each time. And that's why sometimes there's a strike, because that contract's up. And then players want this, owners don't want to, they want to give them that, or, whether it be money or guaranteed contracts. There's a lot that goes into it. But typically, so at the end of the season, you'll get told whether your option's picked up or not. If it's not, if you're completely out of contract, there's usually drafts where players can re-enter. But even at that point, I think even if you want to join another team, the old team still has your rights, even though they don't want to keep you. So at that point, you're kind of stuck. It was being from another country and knowing, obviously, I signed 2 years in Scotland. I'm guaranteed 2 years. They don't want to keep me for 2 years. That's all right. They'll pay me out. There's non-guaranteed contracts as well. So by there used to be a deadline right in the middle of the season, and it used to be, and this was nerve wracking, especially if you're down in the pecking order. So it's coming to say June 1st, whatever it is, and it's May 28th, and you have a contract that's non-guaranteed. Every year they'd call one or two guys in, they'd be like, "Hey, I'm sorry, but we're going to let you go," and they just cut you right there. So you're done. You're off the team, and you can't sign with anybody else. Really, it's just that time of the year. So it's definitely getting a little bit better with guaranteed contracts and stuff like that. But the way things go as well with the trade, and I mean, I got traded enough during my MLS career. You just get a phone call. Most of the time, you know nothing about it, and it's like, "Hey, Adam, we've just traded you to," in my instance, Seattle. Yeah, so you got to be there in 2 days. And that's it. You can't say, can I stay or no? That's it. It's been done, and it's done behind your back. Which is the way they're kind of used to it in American sports over here. But it can sting. A couple of times when I get traded, it stings. Especially if you feel like you're contributing, and it's not like, "Hey, Adam, you're moving from the east end of Glasgow to the west end." It's like, no, you're moving 2,000 miles. It's a complete different thing. So it's definitely interesting how things are working, but they're constantly evolving, and they're shifting kind of more to the way the rest of the world does it. But I don't know if it'll ever be the exact same.
How much notice did you get before you went to Portland?
So Portland was an interesting one. So that was from Columbus. So Portland's first year in MLS was 2011. So what they do for that, and it's not used as much as it used to be, but it used to be an expansion draft. So anytime a new team would join the league, that new team got to do a draft and at that point, 2011 was Portland and Vancouver were coming in at the same time. So both those teams, so each team has, say they have 22 players, they can protect 10 of them. So if my 10 best players, I'm going to protect them. So Portland can't pick them at all. They can pick off the other 12, but they can't pick any of those 10 protected players. So I wasn't protected from Columbus at that point, but I think they assumed I wasn't playing it. Towards the end of that season, I started that season. I was kind of, I don't know if I just faded by the end of the year. I was tired, whatever. I just wasn't playing. So their assumption was they're not going to pick me up. We won't protect them. Even though I was young and I was cheap as well. My contract wasn't that much. I'd signed a new contract at that point, but it wasn't anything huge. But Portland ended up signing me. John Spencer was the new manager there. He'd gone from being an assistant at Houston Dynamo, and he became the head coach. And he'd liked the games I'd played against them, so he ended up taking me there. And so that one I knew maybe a couple of days. My agent at that point had reached out to both teams, Vancouver, Portland. "Are you guys interested?" And Portland, like, "Yeah, we're really interested." So, but again, you just don't know with these things changing. But we were ready for a little change, get out of Ohio. So went up to Portland, and it was a little bit more like home there with the weather. For sure, it was a lot of rain, but it was fun.
How did you find Portland your time there? It didn't seem to be probably the best time of your footballing career, but how was it as a place?
Yeah, it wasn't, football-wise wasn't great, but they really changed them. Probably Seattle really changed the culture of soccer. I'll use it right now in America. It really did change because they're packing out. They only hold 20, maybe up to 24,000 now. They keep expanding, but they sell out every single game. And there is definitely a bigger European influence. They like to watch the game. They're singing the whole game. Sometimes you could go to places where it's more like a family day out. They take the kids at the night and all the kids at the game. That's still a little bit of the case. Some of the stadiums. Whereas there, it's the fans. They're singing the whole time. They're really getting into the game. It's intimidating. It was very different from the rest of how the MLS had been. And I think they saw, okay, this is downtown. There's a little bit of history here. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Again, football-wise, it wasn't great. I mean, my highlight from being in Portland was Uh, Getting Thierry Henry a red card, that was
right. So before we will ask this question, right? So the year before you left Columbus Crew, Thierry Henry joined New York Red Bulls and they won that conference. Had anything happened in previous games with Thierry Henry, or was this just totally out of the blue?
It was totally out of the blue. I think just the way the game was going, So I came into the game, and it was a chippy game. He didn't like playing on turf. He took a shot. I remember him taking a shot, and I gave him a little nudge, and it was with his left foot, and he didn't like how I landed on him. So he's like, "Don't land on me like that." Whatever he said, I was like, well, it wasn't anything to it. And he was trying to say, because then he tried to hit me kind of when we're done. I was like, well, you don't want to try to give me a pop. And he's like, that was my left foot, my balance, whatever. So as we're kind of talking through it, just as we're walking back, and he gives me a little slap in the back of the dome, and then bang, he hits me a good one. So I turn around and shove him. I'm like, nah, that was a little bit hard. So, and he's a big boy as well. I was like, oh, what have I done here? And he was, I played against him a lot, and the guy was unbelievable. I mean, even though he's a little bit older, you couldn't go, if you went too close to him, he'd just touch it by you and just a couple of big steps and he'd be gone. But I remember just shoving him, and I'm like, oh, here we go. And then the linesman throws his flag up. I'm like, oh, I haven't been able to play here, but I'm going to come on for 5 minutes and get sent off. So the linesman called the referee over. They spoke and came up to me, gave me I think maybe gave me the yellow and then gave him a red. And I'm like, oh, or maybe it was the other way around. But he was definitely sneaky about it. And then that got a lot. I mean, millions of people watched that. It's just like, oh, Thierry Henry in America getting mugged or whatever, So the fans were loving it. They were, giving him all that. But that was funny. But he tried to be sneaky. I'm a Man U fan, So at the end of the day, it was good for me. It was all an Arsenal guy. He scored too many good goals against Man U. So I was just, definitely one of my highlights. Everybody was texting me from back home, hey, we saw what you did. He was something else, though. Older, obviously was not in the top of his game, but the guys who played with him, man, he was world class. You could see just how dominant he was. Like coming in MLS, he still dominated. It was amazing to get to play with guys like that.
Yeah, so that was kind of a less footballing highlight, but we'll go back to football highlights now. So you moved to Houston Dynamo.
Yep.
Was that a kind of saving grace in football? Again, same way that Columbus Crew was when you were at Elgin, that you came into a team who just seemed to kick on from the minute you came in?
Yeah, but I remember that process. So I remember going to Portland, I got hurt, and then my father-in-law passed away when I was in Portland. So my wife and I probably were done. She's from California, so we were in California for about a month or so. And then coming back, and my hamstrings were still bugging me. I just couldn't get going. My confidence was shot. I mean, it's amazing how many times in the career you can be like, I'm on top, my confidence is shot. But I remember, and it was tough because John Spencer was a guy I loved, growing up, Scottish player. I know he had a lot of faith and trust. He brought me in. He was wanting me to be captain there, but it just never worked out. And I loved him. He was a fiery little guy, he's so funny. But there's always that during your career, you kind of, I don't say you disappoint people, but when you have that expectation. So I remember thinking, oh man, I feel bad because I know that they have this expectation what I can do and what I'm capable of doing, and I knew I could do it, right? But it just was not happening. You see it at the top of the game. I mean, I always reference like Torres, when he scoring all those goals at Liverpool, Fernando, and goes to Chelsea. It just whatever it is, there's something. The confidence just isn't the same as you can do it. But I always felt bad that it never worked out there. But I remember it was close to when I was getting traded, but I remember feeling my hamstring was feeling good. I was feeling strong. I felt like I was getting to that point where I'm like, okay, this is it. I know I'm going to be, from here on out to the rest of the season, there's maybe three months left. I'm there. But I'd get a few phone calls from some former teammates who were playing for other teams. Now, like, hey, my manager's asking about you. He really wants to get you. So it was like DC, Toronto, Chicago. Like they're like, we really want to get you. And I hadn't heard anything about the Dynamo. So I went in and I spoke to John because I know you can just get that phone call and that's it, right? So I didn't want to be blindsided. So I went in, I spoke to them, and I was like, look, it was John and Gavin Wilkinson, who's still he's the technical director there. And talking to him, I'm like, look, I'm right there. I feel like I can contribute the rest of the season. I know, and I had a good enough name where other teams wanted to get me. They knew I could do something, but I wasn't contributing there. But I felt like I was right there. So anyway, I sit down with them. I'm like, just if you want to keep me, keep me. If not, you're going to trade me. I was like, just because we'd been through so much that year with my father-in-law passing away, we wanted to be closer to California, to where my mother-in-law was. So I didn't want to go to DC. It's extortionate as well. I mean, you're on the same money, right? So say you're making, say, 50 grand, right? So I'm in Ohio making 50 grand. You can get Texas, whatever, you can live there comfortably. But you'd be on that same contract, and then, hey, you're going to DC, which is really expensive, or you're going to Toronto, which is really expensive. Nothing changes. It's not like, the cost of living. You can move to LA. They used to have boys living, 4 or 5 boys in a 2-bedroom place just to make sure they could live in LA. It's that expensive. So, yeah, I spoke to them. And I was like, just make it somewhere that's not that far. So a couple of days later, I think we had a game against Ajax, maybe. I think it was a friendly against Ajax, and I was getting ready to play, and they called me and they're like, hey, don't come in for the game. So I was like, okay, here we go. So I go in there. They're like, hey, we've traded you to Houston Dynamo. And that was with John Spencer's old team. So Dom Kinnear was the manager at the time, and we're going to play you in a few weeks. And I was like, I just want to let you guys know I'm probably going to score against you. And they're like, we're not going to let you play. We're not going to let you play. I'm like, and I just knew I was going to have a good season, right? Even though it was 3 months left, I just knew, there's a lot of times in the career you just have that belief, I'm going to do it. So 3 weeks later, the Timbers come, and it was kind of getting to that point of the season. Teams are trying to make the playoffs, and the Timbers were one of them. The Dynamo, when I joined, we're on the brink. It'd been up and down season, so we played them, and ball comes up from a corner kick. I think it just comes out. I was sitting back about 40 yards out, took a touch, and then just put it in the top corner. And I think John Spencer was a little bit sick at that, but it was a great feeling. That was just when you have a little bit of belief in yourself and you actually execute. That was at a turning point. Like you say, that those few months ended up going to the MLS Cup that year, and from 6 months prior, just how things change. You just don't know in the game. There's, like I say, there's so many ups and downs, but that was a crazy season for sure.
Yeah, he's won the conference, went to the MLS Cup final, played against LA Galaxy. You mentioned you grew up a Man United fan, so how was it playing against David Beckham then?
You know what? I mean, we spoke a little bit, like good game and all that stuff, but I never get too involved in that. I think if you do, especially because I was playing against him, he was playing centre mid, he was playing right mid, I was against him a lot, so you just can't get caught up too much in that hype. And all the interviews I was getting, obviously at that point, I was starting, people like, oh, it's on Beckham against Moffat. I'm like, you can't put me in the same league as that guy. But it was fun to be, kind of caught up in all that hype. And he was unbelievable. Again, you give him any space, and that was the thing playing against him. He, unlike Henry, he couldn't run past you. But you give him you just find a little pocket of space, and he can just put that ball wherever you want. But losing that final, obviously that year, I think we lost 1-0. I think Landon Donovan scored in that one. So that was disappointing, but I always tell people that was one of the highlights of my career, was getting there, because I remember going back to the Columbus and the 2008, and we won the MLS Cup, but I never played, So there's definitely mixed emotions there. But I remember the buzz, because we were out in LA, you're there for a week, you're doing all these interviews and you're doing these appearances and stuff like that. I loved that. If I would have been playing, I would have loved it even more in 2008. I wasn't playing, but I'd always set myself the goal. I was like, I want to get back here. I want to enjoy that. And obviously doing that a few years later was fantastic, even though I lost in the final. Like, at the end of the day, I don't care. We lost the game, but just getting back there, there's that accomplishment. And I always tell players, set yourself goals and stuff like that. What do you want to do? Something attainable, obviously. But That was, again, losing, don't care. Getting back there, that was an achievement in itself after, the few years between.
The following season, same thing again, MLS Cup final, LA Galaxy again. It's David Beckham's last game this time. What do you think you have learned? Because LA Galaxy are a pretty similar team, so did yourselves. Had you learned anything differently or changed the way you're going to focus on the game?
I think both of us that year, so both of us finished, so the way the MLS was working at that point, so it was maybe the top 5 in each conference go through or make the playoffs, but then there's like a play-in game. I think we finished 4th in ours. No, we finished 5th. They maybe finished 4th. So neither of us that year, maybe finished as strong during the regular season. And that's another thing about America, the supporter shield, which is the regular season, there isn't as much value on that. Obviously, there's seedings for hosting home games in the playoffs, but neither team would have been expected to go back to the final, to be honest. But because it changes. It's so different. Like the playoff games, it's like a cup game, it's like a proper cup game all the time. And some of these teams, they could win the league games, but that a little bit extra pressure, they just couldn't handle it. So both of us kind of make our way through. We get back to the final again. But again, at that point, so in 2011, before the season had started, they'd said the final is going to be in LA, right? So they just said that's where it's going to be. It's going to be the last season I'm going to do this. They ended up getting to the final, so it's like a home game for them. The next year, they change it to where whoever's the higher seed, so whoever has the most points during the season gets to host the final. And they ended up, both of us again didn't have a great season, but they ended up 1 point above us, so they ended up hosting again. So it's tough. Playing on the road in America is a lot tougher than probably most countries because it's thousands of miles. You're sitting in an airport, you're flying, and sometimes you smaller cities, Columbus, Kansas, you have all these connecting flights, Salt Lake, so if I'm trying to get from Columbus to Portland, there's no flight for that. There's no direct flight. So you get to the airport 2 hours early. You'll fly Columbus to Denver, which is about 2 hours. You sit around there, lay over, and then you'll fly another hour and a half. You get to Seattle, and then you're on the. So it's the travel takes a lot, and you have the time change as well. So sometimes you're playing 3 hour time change. So you're playing a game at 7:30 at night, which maybe is like 10:30 where you've been the day before. So there's all that. There's so many things you just don't realize. But anyway, so that year the Galaxy obviously get to host again. Being on the road, we go up 1-0 at halftime. I got the assist. They love counting the assists over there, so I got that. So we got 1-0.
Adam, a beautiful assist.
Beautiful assist. It was decent. Yeah, it was. Kalen Carr, he wore a helmet. That was how he was known. So him and I had a great connection. Anytime I get that ball, I'm just going to put it around the corner, just start running. So he set off, good finish, 1-0 halftime. We're like, here we go, this is us. And then second half happened, and they get like 2 penalty kicks. Again, it is you give it everything you have. At the end of the day, there's so much you can control. I mean, they have Beckham, Robbie Keane, Landon Donovan, all them making more money than probably our whole team combined.
Yeah.
Each of them individually, you know what I mean? So again, another great experience. It would have been nice to win, but yeah, getting there was fun. And then I got to hang before the game, so I was walking out and I was like, I know that guy. And it was Gerard Butler was the guest. I think he did some film about football he'd made. I don't know. I never saw it, to be honest. But I was like, hey, what's up, Paisley boy? And he's like, oh, really? Sure. His accent. And I'm like, I'm from Linwood. And he's like, oh, no way. So him and I got chatting for a while. And he's like, yeah, Beckham wants me to sit in his suite and that. And I'm like, I'll get you a Dynamo jersey. And he's like, get me one of them. But I went in, tried to get one off the kit man. He wouldn't even give me it. I'm like, come on, it's for Gerard Butler. But it was fun getting to catch up with him. Just he was talking about his time, obviously growing up in Paisley, and yeah, I was at Linwood, and I used to play. I'm sure you did. But he, again, meeting a lot of people like that. I get to meet somebody like that, and He's a guy who's obviously had good success. If I see him again, though, I'll need to get him that Dynamo jersey.
There was a few stories like that. I did notice, looking back through your career, there's been a few stories where you've went down to breakfast in Hawaii, I think.
Oh yeah, Carlos Santana. That was you randomly sit. I remember there was one. It was Serena Williams we were at LAX at the airport. We just got in there as a team, and Serena was there. Oh my goodness, she is a tank. She's a machine, her man. So me and one of my teammates go over, get a picture with her. But traveling through the airports all the time, you've seen all these famous people. And then one time we saw. So this was when I was with the New York Cosmos, and we had a boy called Aleko Eskandarian. Okay, and Aleko, years before, he was a really, really good player. He had to retire because of concussions, but he was Armenian descent, which the Kardashians are the same. So when they first started doing their show, I don't know, it was all scripted, they were like, we got to get you an Armenian guy. So he ended up going on a date with, I think it was Kim Kardashian at the point, years before. So I don't know, maybe 10 years prior. So we're at the airport JFK in New York, and we see Kim Kardashian, and he just ducks like that. Like, what's he doing? So he's shying away. We're like, what was he shying for? And then one of the boys knew, it's Kim. So he starts shouting on him, and he just bolts. He's just like, what's going on? But just funny stuff like that, these connections you have with people. But yeah, the little Armenian.
Is your goal in that semi-final against Kansas your favourite goal of your career?
I think so. I think that one, obviously, there was a lot at stake. Like I say, it's like a cup game when you're in the playoffs there. Leading up to that, for about 2 months before that, I strained my groin, so I was avoiding using my right foot as much as possible, which is tough if you're right-footed. But I just couldn't really kick the ball that far. So I was using my left a lot. I was shooting with my left. I was doing all that, and it was just something that I knew I'd have to finish the season with it. If I stopped, my season would have been done. And getting to that point of the year, I want to contribute. So I wasn't really shooting my right foot, but I remember playing that game. The ball came back out. I took a little touch to the side, and it was just there. I'm like, I'm going to have a pop here. And then just caught it perfectly. Thankfully, the French defender, the big, brave French defender, just kind of dodged it the way he didn't want to get hit in the face with it for Kansas. And then flies in the back of the net. And if you just watch that video, just see, that game was sold 24,000, all fans dressed in orange. Just hearing that stadium erupt, being from a guy who was playing in Elgin and getting 75 people at a game, if that, to 20,000 in the stadium, and just cheering your name and just going wild when that goes in. So that was definitely, it was a quality goal. I maybe scored better ones in terms of quality, but again, it was hard to do. But it was just a moment. It was a big game. There was a lot at stake, and I still get chills when I see it, and I like that one.
Yeah, you spent another season at Houston Dynamo after that, and then 2013, you've already talked about it before, Seattle Sounders in Portland, who were pretty much changing the way MLS was working. They had a huge stadium, so you're even up in the attendances even more. It's Siggy, who was your coach at Columbus Crew, could in for you. Is that the deciding factor for you, or again, are we talking trade?
It was trade. It was at that point. So what ended up happening at that point with the Dynamo, and you don't know too much, and I was playing every single game for them, every game, and two MLS finals back to back. And then 2013, I was having a decent season, and maybe a little bit slower. But at that point, I'd signed a new contract, and because our whole team is doing well, what ends up happening is everybody signs a new contract, and there's a salary cap. You just can't. And then once they go up above that, you can't go above that, basically. So you have to break up the team. So it's very hard for successful teams in MLS to stay together. So there was a young boy coming through at that point who was making a quarter of what I was making. So I think at that point they're like, okay, we're going to move on, whether it's now at the end of the season. And I was making good money. But got a phone call. Dom Kinnear called me, and he's like, hey, we've traded you to Seattle. Yeah, sorry. Absolutely love the time you've had. And again, you don't know how much the coach has a say in it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. That one, there's no hard feelings at that point. I was just kind of ready to get out of Texas, to be honest. Texas is good, but those summers were hot. And going to Seattle was the place to be at that point. The team was really good, the players were good. Sometimes just ready for a change. So I wasn't too bitter, that when that happened. It was, it is what it is. It's part of the business. I was kind of used to that a little bit. But at the same time, at that point, I had the one kid, and the second was due. So my daughter was born. She was born in Houston, and then I had my son was due in about 3 months. So that's tough. That obviously I'm affected, but then it's my wife and my family. It's like, and my kids weren't in school or anything at that point. So, but that takes its toll. As it happens more and more, as you get older, you start thinking, okay, and that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm settled somewhere, and I'm like, I don't get a phone call and say, hey, you have to move. I enjoy that. But I was ready for that, and it was again a short stay in Seattle, but it was, like we spoke about, the fans, unbelievable. Really transforming how the game is over here.
So when you moved to Seattle, do you move yourself, or did you move with your partner and the kid at the time, or did she stay in Texas?
So what we've done a few times is I'd go for a few weeks, because we never bought a house in anywhere we stayed, because we knew at any point you can get that phone call. So we're always leasing. So then I'm having to call my landlord and like, hey, I'm moving to Seattle in 2 days, So then you're breaking leases. It costs money. The way back in the day, you'd be out of pocket, now the MLS is changing, so they kind of cover all those fees and stuff like that. But what ends up happening, what we did is I would go out there for a few weeks. I'd stay at a hotel. The team would put me up in nice hotels. They'd take care of all that, get me a car, whatever I needed. And then I would go find somewhere. So probably 4 or 5 places that we moved to, my wife hadn't even seen the place. I mean, maybe FaceTime or whatever, take pictures. But I mean, I get to pick the houses. Thankfully, I did a good job of it. But maybe 3 weeks to a month later, she comes, joins us. Yeah, so it's a lot. Especially you're moving from completely different states. It's almost like moving to a different country, really. I mean, the places are totally different. The climate's different.
What was most impressive about Seattle?
They were one of the first organizations that there's some, I don't want to say they're tight, because they're spending millions, it's their money. But they were a bit freer with how they spent their money, like signing Clint Dempsey, Obafemi Martins was there at the time, Jimmy Traore, the guys with bigger names, but they weren't shy to spend that money. And some of the older teams, who were, they wouldn't spend millions on Clint Dempsey. They wouldn't do it, but they saw, hey, we can spend millions on Clint, bringing the fans in, and they're ambitious. They're really ambitious. They really get feedback from their fans, how they do things, and that changed the culture of things a little bit over here, because all of a sudden they start spending all this money. Other teams are like, okay, want to keep up, because it's not only the success side, and the Sounders have had a lot of success since they came in. I mean, made the playoffs every single year, which prior to that, teams who were coming in, playoff teams, none of them were making the playoffs ever. They just weren't doing it. But they came in, they're like, oh, we're going to spend the money, we're going to do it. And they just brand themselves really well as well. They were sponsored by Xbox at that time. People see Microsoft, Xbox, they see that, and it's instant recognition. So I loved it. I mean, and we played a game against the Galaxy. You get 65,000 people in there, which isn't even a full stadium, because they're playing in the American football of the Seahawks, and that, I think that holds maybe 80 or something. I had 70 odds, whatever, but could be even more. But having 65,000 people in a stadium and you're playing in the game there, that's something you dream of as a kid. I've seen all these games where all the people watching you. So I truly enjoyed that, even though it was a brief stay.
Yeah, it was a brief stay. Then you had a brief spell at DC United the following season.
Dallas.
And, at Dallas the following season.
Back to Texas, yeah.
And then the interest from the USL Championship, New York Cosmos, who have restructured.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, so they were actually at that point. So I did the year with Dallas, and then the Cosmos were the NASL was the league at that point. So it was slightly above the USL, and the NASL wanted to do like the rest of the world, right? They wanted to no salary cap, promotion relegation if they could get there. If they had enough teams, they would probably shoot for that. It's kind of anti MLS, different from how they're doing it. But at that point, when I'd left Dallas, I came over to England, actually, and I had a trial with Birmingham City. So I was over for about 4 or 5 days training with them. So I'd thought about maybe coming back over and, maybe pursuing. It probably would have been England at that point. I don't know if I would move back to Scotland. Just financially, I had a decent offer from the Cosmos. And I knew in England I could probably, make a little bit more money than Scotland. That's just how it is. So I went over there, and it was actually really good because throughout my career, you move to the MLS, and people think it's a bit of a joke. It's changed a little bit, I want to say, but people don't take it as seriously. And it's what's the level really like? It's like this guy played in the 3rd division in Scotland, and then playing over there, I could do it. So I'd always wondered, is that true? So going over England, and Birmingham never ended up signing me, but I know myself, like I could play at that level. Like I again, just that confidence in myself. I'm like, there wasn't much style to how they did it. It's definitely more physical, especially when you get in the English leagues like that. They play a lot of games, and it's definitely more physical, not as much style. And I'd learned over the years playing with so many different people, I had a little bit more style of play, but I was physical at the same time. Growing up in Scotland, you have to be willing to, put your body in the challenges and stuff like that. So that was good for my, just to kind of recap my career, just thinking I could have gone back at some point, and I could have definitely made a good career for myself. I'm not saying it would be easy, but I know I could have stayed at that level. So it was good just to see that my progress had continued, and it wasn't just it's just easy in the MLS. It's definitely the standard, and a lot of boys are so surprised when they come over and they play, and they're like, man, these guys are good. This is good, and I think it's definitely getting a little bit more respect than it was maybe when I first came over.
Yeah, it's difficult to measure up the standard because you never played in the Championship. But the one thing I think I will say, and recapping your career, is you would have had a less interesting career if you'd played it out in English lower leagues. So you've went to New York Cosmos, who at that point have got Raul, they signed Marcos Senna, Nico Kranker, who ended up at Rangers, Samaras and Joe Cole are playing in the league. So there's massive talent from European football playing there. Was the level that much of a drop from the MLS to the NASL?
Overall, the whole league, yes. From the team I was on, the New York Cosmos, no. I mean, just the names you mentioned, those guys are older, but they could still play. I mean, Raul was unbelievable, even though he was 36, 37 at that point. But just the brain on this guy, he was just, and he wasn't, and I remember, again, being a Man U fan, the amount of goals he scored against Man U, I mean, he broke my heart a few times, but he was an unbelievable, I always think of, like Roger Federer, I always think Roger Federer, class act, a guy you see just seems like a good guy, maybe he's not, I don't know him, but I'd always thought that about Raul. And then sometimes you meet people and they're just like, or you hear stuff about them. But this guy he had 5 kids, he was a great dad, just the way he treated them, he'd bring them into training, he'd work hard. He was never once like thinking he's above anyone, even though he is, technically in terms of what he's achieved. But he would joke about with the least of the players, the young guys who are just coming in, he'd talk to them, joke around with them. And that was really, really amazing to see. Just a quality guy. And learning, again, that was similar to playing with the Guillermo Barcelotto years prior. I just win that ball, just give it to Raul and just kind of let him, maybe be the legs for guys like that, but just let him do his stuff. But we went on, the Cosmos were obviously the team from back in the day, when they were in the actual NASL, they ran into financial troubles, and that's what happened again. They spent we never get any back. But we went on a trip to Cuba. So the US had travel bans going to Cuba. So they lifted it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So we were the first sports team to go there. So I'm in Cuba with Raul, Marcos Senna. Pele is on the trip with us. So he's on the plane with us. So we have Pele, and then we have Carmelo Anthony, who's a big-time basketball player. One of the best basketball players the last 10 years or so over here. So I'm on this plane. I'm like, can't write this. So I'm on this plane with Pele, all these guys, and we're staying in this hotel in Cuba. I'm like, I would never have thought in a million years you just sitting with a Cuban cigar and just, with sitting with Pele, having dinner with Pele. So it was surreal, it really was.
In your time at New York Cosmos, you played with some of the best players. You've won the league twice. You scored another few screamers. You were a penalty taker, scoring goals for fun.
Yep.
Had a couple injuries at that point. Is that when you've realised that your career's maybe going to be coming to an end?
Yeah, I got a bad one in my and again, getting hurt a lot. I mean, that's kind of towards. I ended up playing my last 2 years at Sacramento and then got hurt as well there. It takes its toll. I remember my first year in New York, I got a bad injury in my foot, and I thought that was it at that point. I was maybe 29, 30. But I'm being physical your whole career, getting stuck in, that's kind of the job. It definitely did take its toll on my hamstrings. Sometimes I'd have spells with my hamstrings a whole season. Like when I was in Dallas, one of the years, I'd pull my hamstring. I'd come back for 2 weeks. I'd pull it again, and you try and get on top of that. So definitely that takes its toll on you. But fortunately, that was my first season in New York. I was hurt. And then my second season, I again got back in the team, got healthy, was playing every game, taking the penalty kicks, scoring some good ones. And we had another good team that year. But again, stepping down from the MLS, there was a couple of things that definitely. So with New York, I couldn't get traded. I was guaranteed. My contract was guaranteed for 2 years. I couldn't get traded, so that definitely was something that appealed to me because I knew it's like, okay, I'm moving my family here, and I'm going to be there for 2 years no matter what. Right, no matter what, I was going to be there for 2 years. So it kind of takes away the stress of the off-field stuff. Of just worrying about, okay, I get that phone call from my agent. Hey, you sitting down? That's one time I got that. Agent called me and he's like, hey, you sitting down? And I'm like, oh, don't tell me, So that definitely took away those stressors there. And I'm glad I did it. I wasn't sure how New York was going to be living wise. Moving from Dallas was laid back. You get a lot of bang for your buck. You can rent a big house. Everything's nice. New York was a little bit intimidating, but we loved it. We loved our time there.
And then stepping down, was Sacramento a deliberately chosen final destination? Did you know that was where you were going to settle, or was it just another step down with a contract?
It was. They were, again, Sacramento's a team who has a lot of fans for the league they're in. So they're in the USL, but they get 10, 11,000 at games, which a lot of the teams in the USL at that point don't get. They still don't. They'll get maybe a couple thousand. But I knew at that point I was I'd want to be somewhere where I could see myself being long-term. And the thing with Sacramento is they were right on the brink of, possibly going into the MLS, right? And that's in the long term. I'm like, okay, maybe I won't be playing. Like I knew that for a fact. But maybe there'll be an opportunity for me within the organization somewhere, whether it be coaching or something else. So that definitely appealed to me. And another factor was we were in New York, and I spoke earlier, my mother-in-law's in California. So being in Sacramento, it's close. It's a 7-hour drive, which is considered close. It's a quick flight, and that was another thing as well. It's like, okay, being somewhat close to family, because anytime we were trying to get to California from New York or Texas, it takes a long time. The travel is tough, so it definitely appealed to us. And like I say, but it wasn't. It was. I still felt I'd plenty to give. I'm coming off 2 years winning the championship with the Cosmos. I knew I could definitely contribute and, hopefully win a championship with them. I always, throughout my career, I was fortunate to be on good team. I would say beyond good teams, but I always felt I contributed that, being a good teammate, working hard, just setting a good example, especially as I got older as well for these younger players, that you want to have a career here, you really have to work. So it was good. I'm glad, that's where we decided to go.
The final thing I want to talk about, you alluded to it a wee bit earlier. So you represented Scotland at youth levels very successfully. You were playing amongst players that were from Celtic, Rangers, and you felt that you were a standard above. We've spoke to Stephen Caldwell recently, who talked about a potential move to the MLS when he was a couple of years younger, and he felt like moving outside of the UK would have killed any hope he would have ever had of having a Scotland career. Do you feel that if you'd had the success you had and the trophies you had anywhere in the lower leagues in England, you would have been in Scotland squads?
I think I would have got some recognition. Yeah, I definitely do. I remember getting back to my second, so 2011, 2012, the second MLS Cup final in a row, and there was a little bit of chatter. I don't know, it was people obviously alluding to the fact, like, wait, this guy's playing against Beckham, Donovan, Robbie Keane in a big final in front of tens of thousands of people. Like, can we get him? So again, I wasn't too bothered, but before that, I was just focused on playing as well as I could. But I would definitely have loved to get that shot. It never happened, And I was in the Scotland youth setup from the age of 12 up. I was in and around up until under 19s. But yeah, you move over, and like I say, it's not taken as seriously. Definitely getting more recognition now, and I think now if you do it, I don't think it's going to harm you as much. I think the exposure is way bigger. You guys are getting games over there now. You can watch that. But around about those years when I was in, I don't think it was taken as seriously, even though, you boys coming over and they knew it was hard. Guys who'd played in the Premiership in England, played in Scotland, the quality is good. It really is.
The one last thing I'd like to ask you on international football, is there no case in which you could have applied for US citizenship and played for the US of A?
I didn't get my citizenship until maybe 2 years ago. So
right, okay.
At that point, I'd have been a senior team. Maybe I could play with over 50s at some point, but no. And maybe if I got it younger, but again, I wouldn't even... there'd be more chance of me definitely making the Scotland team than the US team. The quality's way better in the American team than it is the Scottish team in reality. I know people think maybe in Scotland they think, oh no, but you look at the rankings, the Americans put out some good teams, and even now they're going through, they're not going through a great spell, in the US. They're trying to transform things and do that, but they've always done well on the international side. Obviously, they had an upset not making the World Cup, but yeah, they're heading in a really, really, really good direction though. Like internationally, you're seeing all these boys now, and we have it here in Sacramento. A couple of the young boys who with the Republic, the Bundesliga's teams are coming in and getting them at 16, 17. They're moving over there, and they're just learning the trade over there. And there's going to be, you're seeing boys like Reina coming through now. Even the Canadian Alphonso Davis, it's going to be 10, 15 years. It's going to be, all these players are going to come through, and the US is going to make some big strides.
Adam, thanks so much for doing this. A story, you almost chucked football and Elgin, went to the MLS and won it all. Really appreciate you letting us tell your story. It's been a load of fun to recap it.
Oh no, thank you, John. Yeah, it's good to kind of go back through it again. Sometimes it's good to go back through and kind of realise, oh man, that is a pretty good story.